Hi everyone, my name's Sophie. I work for Star Academies, a multi-academy trust with schools across the country. I'm not a teacher, but I'm privileged to work with teachers and school leaders as part of my job. I am a mum, and while the challenges of helping children learn at home will be different for everyone, it's something none of us were prepared for a couple of months ago. To accompany our home learning advice line, StarLive, we are hosting a weekly broadcast with a range of guests to cover different ideas to help you keep your kids learning and happy. Our guest this week is Dave Whitaker, Director of Learning at Wellspring Academy Trust. Dave's innovative work shows the power of care, love, support, and in his own words, battering them with kindness. Dave's going to share his thoughts on how to support children to deal with the range of emotions they will be feeling in the current situation. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Morning, Sophie.
So to start with, why might the current situation be having an impact on the behaviour of children?
Well, I think we've all found out how difficult it is being in a sort of lockdown situation, and I think that what we've got to understand is if we're finding it difficult as adults, the children are going to be finding it really tough too. Long periods of isolation, away from familiar routines, their strong, really strong relationships that they might have, not only with friends in school, but also with really trusted adults. It's just bound to impact on the way that children are, and every day that goes past is an extra day that's adding to that level of stress and anxiety, that separation. You could even look at it like almost like loss and grief, in a sense that children are separated from people who they care about and who care about them, and people who they love spending time with. So that's really important. Another thing to bear in mind as well, which probably people don't think about, is some children really struggle at school, and they have anxiety when they are at school. So they may have actually been really enjoying being at home.
Yeah.
So there may be some anxiety associated with the prospect of going back as well, because actually socially they really struggle at school. So they might have found their place at home, and getting them back to school and preparing them to go back to school could be really difficult. So just that increased stress and anxiety, that heightened sense of tension that might be in the home as well, so that the children themselves might be exposed to tension amongst the adults and the behaviour that comes from that. We all find it difficult. We're all stuck in our houses, and we're not getting out much, and so just the whole atmosphere in the house, could be really challenging. I think there's also something that's worth bearing in mind, and that's the tension that the adults might feel around having to perform at home as home educators. That can be really, really difficult, and there must be an expectation there that they've got to do so much work every day, that they've got to keep up with what's happening and what the expectations from school are. It might be that the parents themselves are exposed to social media, where they read on social media how brilliant everybody else's households are and how fantastic the children are doing, and they're sitting at home going, well, that's not the case at my house. I mean, I suspect that most people are having trouble and problems and finding it stressful, and I think the stuff that you might read on social media, on Facebook, about how brilliant everybody else's houses are, a little pinch of salt might be required, because I think they're probably going through the same thing.
Yeah, it's not real life, is it?
No, that's right, and I think as parents, a lot of it's about expectation, and I think it's difficult if you set your expectations really, really high about what to expect from your children, then you're going to struggle to get there. It's probably best if you set your expectations a little lower, and then you get the satisfaction of achieving what you need to achieve on a day-to-day basis with your children.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about is an unusual situation where both parents and children might be behaving not in their typical fashion, and so it's for both to kind of reset. What sort of key approaches can adults use to respond to behaviour that maybe isn't what they're used to with their kids?
Well, dare I say it, but I think a lot of it is to do with trying to remain calm, and I think that's really difficult. And as a parent myself, I find that extremely difficult. I suppose more so with my own children than I do with children in schools, because if your expectations are so high, and you can get frustrated, because if you have high expectations of your own children, then you will get frustrated really quickly with them. And I think it's really, really important that you try to make a connection with your children. And make an emotional connection. Of course, you've got an emotional connection with your own children, but in a different scenario. it's different making that connection with them when you're expecting them to do maths and English, or you're supporting them through some sort of work that they've been sent from school. So that is a totally different scenario than a normal day-to-day existence in the family home. So it's really important that you try to make that connection. So one of the things that we do in the schools that I'm involved with in the trust, and right across the trust, when we're working with quite complex children, but also children who can show anxiety and stress and trauma-related behaviours, we do something about, we talk about making a connection before we make a correction, and a lot of that is done through something that we look at, something that we refer to it as regulate, relate, and repair. So I suppose my advice is to think about it really carefully. The first one of those three R's is regulate, and essentially that means that you yourself as an adult need to remain calm. You need to regulate your own behaviour. If you can regulate your own behaviour, you're more likely to be able to make a connection with your child. If your child is scared by anything that's happening in that situation, then they won't be able to make that emotional connection, and they won't be able to respond in a controlled emotional way. So they will not be regulated themselves, and the way that we look at it, and when we're looking at it in schools, is it's really important that if your child is involved in something that can only be described as a chaotic situation, it's really important that you as an adult don't join them in that chaos by allowing yourself to dysregulate and to start shouting and to cause more mayhem. And you yourself have got to be the sort of take the moral high ground, if you like, and you're the one as an adult who needs to be able to regulate your behaviour, and that can be done with assertive language. You can be assertive and you can get what you need to do, but there's a difference between assertive language and demand language. And demand language is when you start shouting and screaming and find yourself getting out of control yourself, and 9 times out of 10 your children are not going to respond to that in a successful way. I think it's sometimes that regulate as well can also involve making sure that the children have got space. So don't find yourself following them around. So if they want to escape for some space, if you're not careful as a parent, you'll follow them and you'll chase them around the house or into another room because they're not responding to you. And what you do is you insist that they respond to you, even though they're not capable of doing it in that moment. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you're not going to deal with this. It just means that in that moment, it might be wise to just take a step back. And sometimes taking a step back will allow for some calm. So the next phase is that relate. So once you've regulated yourself and once you've allowed your child to regulate, you should now have some calm, and you're not forcing a situation. And once you've taken that calm and that situation, that relate is the time to empathise, and try to be curious with the child about why it is that they've got themselves into that state in the first place. And that might be simply asking questions where you're empathising with the child and asking them to explain what's happened. You might know exactly what's happened, but it's nice to actually ask them. And if you ask them what's happened, what you will find is they will hopefully try and explain it in their way, so that you can actually have some empathy with them. And that's really really powerful, but also allows them time, and that empathy, the element of relating allows them time. And following that, we've got the repair phase, and this is all about you working together with your child to put it right. And this can be a really important phase where you have to really resist to impose a sanction, because sometimes our default is to jump and leap immediately to a sanction. It is, well, you've done that, so now you're going to be punished. Now, this phase actually looks at what needs to be done to put it right, rather than you're going to get punished for it because that's all I know. And this can be something about this is where we sort of introduce the concept of a restorative approach, where together you would explain. You can insist on high standards, and you can explain what those high standards are. But what you've got to do is you've got to offer your ability to work with the children to repair what's gone wrong and put it right. And so that regulate, relate, and repair is something that could be a real sort of powerful way of looking these incidents from a parent's point of view when working with the children.
That's really helpful. So you start by regulating both your own reaction so that you join your calm, and then you help them to regulate so that they join you in their calm, and then you relate and you ask them to explain the situation to help you to empathise with them, and then you repair, and that repair is finding something to put it right rather than a sanction necessarily, or a criticism or a punishment. Okay,
Yeah.
that's really helpful. Thank you. And are there any tips that you can give us on how to talk to children and young people and what to listen for in their responses?
Well, what I mentioned briefly when we're just talking about the regulate, relate, and repair, about the use of a restorative approach, and most people will have heard of restorative justice and restorative practices, but what we tend to use in our schools is an approach, a general approach to the way that we talk to children and work with children that is focused on a restorative format. And
tell me a bit about what restorative means before you.
So obviously restorative, if you take it literally in a word, we're talking about putting things right and restoring the calm and repairing and building relationships. But it can be something simple as, if there's been an incident with a child, it might be something as simple as just asking the child to tell you what happened. Sometimes we have a default as adults. We say to children in the heat of the moment, "Why did you do that?" And we're all guilty of that. I've done it loads of times, particularly when I first started teaching. "Why did you do that?" And guess what? The response quite often is, "I don't know." And so therefore you back yourself in a corner. You've asked a question, the child doesn't know. Well, where do you go next? Now, you may have seen an incident happen in the home. You may have seen something happen with your child. You might know what's happened, but if you ask that question, "Can you tell me what's happened?" Once you've restored some calm and you're able to talk, and you ask a child what's happened, immediately that child starts to reflect. And by telling you what's happened and you being sympathetic and empathetic to that, the child is immediately reflecting. Once they've told you what's happened, it might be something simple as then asking how that made them feel. And once they start to then describe how it made them feel, you are then starting to show empathy with them and understand why they did it. But also, you can also ask them, how do you think it made you feel, and how did it make other people in the house feel? And then what you're getting from the child is a sense of empathy and understanding of their behaviour and the impact on the others. So there's a big piece of learning going on just by some simple questioning. And then once you've unpicked all that with some simple question, and it might only take minutes. This isn't something that's going to take hours and hours and hours. You get into a position where you might just be able to say, well, what can we do to put things right? And what's important about that phrase, which I tend to highlight on a lot, is what can we do to put things right? Not what are you going to do to put it right? Yeah. And therefore the children get a sense of that you're in it together and that they're going to be helped to put things right. So what can we do to put it right? Now that might mean that they then suggest, okay, I've just thrown this stuff all over the floor, so I'm going to tidy it up because actually that's the right thing to do. Now, I could have immediately punished them by saying, right, you need to tidy that up. But actually what I've done is I've managed to get them to understand and realise that the best thing to do and the right thing to do is to tidy up. Now, what they'll do is they'll then tidy up without being grumpy about it, without wanting to seek revenge, without feeling like they're being picked on. And what they'll do is they'll understand that together you've worked out that they need to do something to put this right. Now that is in its simplest terms. We've only got a few minutes, but in its simplest terms, that's the sort of basis of a restorative approach. You still get to an end point where the child has understood that they may have done something wrong and not appropriate, but they've understood how it's made people feel, why they did it. You've understood potentially why they've done it, and together you've managed to find a way through it and a solution to put it right. Yeah. They probably are less likely to do it again if you've been through that approach.
And will that approach work as well with young children as it will with teenagers?
Do you know what? It will. And the reason I say that is because I used to use that approach with my own children, even when they were tiny. So we used to sit down and we used to talk it through, and you'd be amazed. You'd be absolutely amazed at the response that small children will have to simple questions. If you ask a small child, a primary school child, why they did something, they probably won't be able to tell you. If you ask them to explain to you and describe to you what they did, then they probably will be able to tell you, and immediately they start to reflect. And you'd be amazed at then how they can start then thinking about how that might have impacted on how it's made them feel and other people in the house feel. and it's really powerful, and it can be really powerful. And as an adult, it's okay to give them prompts. It's okay to sort of steer them in the direction that you want to steer them in with some simple language. And I think that we forget that we're working with some really sophisticated children here who can think, and they can empathise, and they can understand. You just might have to help them a little bit to do it in the first place, without, as I said before, that default reaction we sometimes have as adults of thinking, right, you've just done something wrong, you now need to be punished. And it's a little bit like the reaction themselves, and understanding as a parent and as a teacher and as an adult that you can't always see a stressful response as a naughty response. Because if the child is, we talked at the start of this session around the stress that the children might be under by being trapped in the house in the sort of lockdown scenario. Now, they will be having stressful responses. That doesn't necessarily mean that's what we would traditionally call a naughty response. And then as an adult, we need to be able to pick that apart a bit and look at what that actually means in that scenario and the context of where it is in that sort of home environment.
That's great, and that's so helpful. Thank you, Dave. So to reiterate, it was regulate, then relate, and then repair. And those are the three kind of, we can use those words as a mantra to help us in our communication with our children. Thanks so much for joining us. We know that children will be facing a range of emotions at the moment, and that your normal strategies that you usually use may need to adapt. For more personalised advice and guidance, we would encourage you to call StarLine on the number at the bottom of the screen, 0330 313 9162. We have a team of over 200 specialists, including behaviour specialists, ready to answer your questions on a range of subjects such as the curriculum, maths and English, and any other subject, behaviour, advice on supporting your child's wellbeing during lockdown, or ways to plan a home learning schedule that works for you. Next week on StarLive is the one about positive parenting with Matt Buttery, CEO of Triple P Parenting. We look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, stay safe.